Hey guys, today we're going to be going over Genesis chapter 19 from the English Standard Version, the ESV. Last week or last lesson, we looked over Genesis 18, the bottom of Genesis 18, in which Abraham is kind of bargaining with God to try and basically test God and how good he is. God's plan is to scout out, well, he sent some angels to scout out the city of Sodom to see if the people there are as wicked as he's heard them to be. And Abraham is saying, please don't destroy the whole city, assuming that God will. And he says, okay, if there's 50 good people, 50 righteous people in the city, will you spare the whole city? And he basically keeps bringing that number down, 45, 40, 35, 30, 20, and then finally 10 people. God, if there's only 10 good people in this city, will you spare the city of Sodom? And so that's where we left off. So we're going to pick up in Genesis chapter 19. I'm reading from the ESV, English Standard Version. The title up the top is God Rescues Lot. The two angels came to Sodom in the evening, and Lot was sitting in the gate of Sodom. When Lot saw them, he rose to meet them and bowed himself with his face to the earth and said, my lords, please turn aside to your servant's house and spend the night and wash your feet. Then you may rise up early and go on your way. They said, no, we will spend the night in the town square. But he pressed them strongly. So they turned aside to him and entered his house. And he made them a feast, and baked unleavened bread, and they ate. Okay, similar situation. We got the two angels that have come to Sodom. We established previously that the three men who came to Abraham, we believe one to be God or the Lord, and the other two to be angels. And here it pretty much clearly says that the two of them that God sent to Sodom are angels. When they come to Sodom, who do they find? They find Lot. The angels, when they come to the city of Sodom, they find Abraham's nephew, Lot. And what's he doing? He's sitting in the gate. So he's sitting at the entrance to Sodom looking out. Why is he looking out? I don't know. Kind of interesting. And the moment he sees them, he rises to meet them and he bows with his face to the earth. Now, that kind of reminds me of Abraham's encounter with the Lord and the two angels in the previous chapter, in the way that Abraham rushed to them. He ran to them. He bowed down to them. He put himself in a humble position. Lot is doing a similar thing. I wonder if it's for the same reasons. I wonder if Lot knows who these guests to the city are, because at this point they just appear like men. I wonder if he knows that they're angels. Maybe like Abraham, maybe he had some sort of spiritual connection with them, something in his heart. He had a sense who they were, maybe. Or maybe there's another reason why he greeted them so hospitably, with such hospitality. So he says, he asks and he insists that they come and they spend the night with him, that they have a meal, that they sleep at his house that night, and that he looks after them. But then they respond by saying, no, we're going to spend the night in the town square. We're just going to sleep out in the middle of town. But he insisted. It says in verse 3 that he pressed them strongly. And so they obliged. They turned to him, they followed him, and they entered his house. I wonder why he was so insistent. I wonder why. Maybe we'll find out later on in this chapter. Verse 4. But before they lay down, the men of the city, the men of Sodom, both young and old, all the people, to the last man, surrounded the house. That would have been a lot of people. All the men, the young guys, the teenage guys, and the super old guys, all the men in the city, apparently, according to this verse, came and surrounded Lot's house where the angels were staying. And they called to Lot, where are the men who came to you tonight? Bring them out to us, that we may know them. Lot went out to the men at the entrance, shut the door after him, and said, I beg you, my brothers, do not act so wickedly. Behold, I have two daughters who have not yet known any man. Let me bring them out to you, and do to them as you please. Only do nothing to these men, for they have come under my shelter of my roof. and they said, "Stand back." And they said, "This fellow came to sojourn," as in Lot. You're new here. You're new to Sodom. Okay, you're only a traveler here. You're staying here temporarily, and you want to judge us. This fellow came to sojourn, and he has become the judge. Now we will deal worse with you than with them. That sounds like a threat. Then they pressed hard against the man Lot and drew near to break the door down. But the men reached out their hands and brought Lot into the house with them and shut the door. And they struck with blindness the men who were at the entrance of the house, both small and great, so that they wore themselves out groping for the floor. Okay, interesting section here. There's a lot of terminology here that is implying things in a kind of PG way that we might not be used to. A lot of phrases that we're not used to and that we definitely wouldn't use nowadays. One phrase I want to point out for you is the term know. To know someone. When we talk about knowing someone, you might say, "Oh, do you know so and so?" It's like, "Oh yeah, I know so and so. I know him. I know about him. Yeah, he's cool. He's a cool guy." But often in the Bible, in biblical stories, when someone says to know someone, they're talking about sexual relations. Okay, and in this case, it's not in a positive way. Okay, probably the first time we hear about knowing someone in the Bible is at the start of Genesis, when Adam and Eve knew each other. Okay, God instructed them to be fruitful and to multiply, and so the way it words it, gracefully and delicately, is saying that they knew each other, and that's a positive way of knowing someone. That's a positive interaction between a man and a wife. In this situation, a gang of men of the city of Sodom, they came to Lot's house, banging on the door, demanding that they know Lot's guest. Okay, so they must have seen Lot greet these two angels at the gate, at the entrance to the city. They must have witnessed him. They must have spied on him, bringing them into his house. And they must have just been so, I don't know. I can't imagine what would bring a group of people to do something like that, but they wanted to force themselves on Lot's guests. So this is a really wicked act. This is a really disgusting and vile thing that they want to do. Okay, so we can see God has sent the angels to the city of Sodom to scout it out to see if it does fulfill the bad reputation that they heard of the city, to scout out and see if the people are living wickedly. And you can see straight up that they are in a wicked state of living. Okay, these men, they want to have sexual relations with Lot's guests. Disgusting, really disgusting. And what does Lot do? He's in a tricky situation. He hears them knocking on the door, yelling out, "We want to know your guests." So he opens up the door, he closes it behind him, doesn't want to let them in. He stands between the men and the door. And what does he say? He says, "I beg you, my brothers, do not act so wickedly." That's in verse 7. "Behold, I have 2 daughters who have not known any man. Let me bring them out to you and do to them as you please. But just don't do anything to these men, for they have come under the shelter of my roof." So in his desperation, he hands over his daughters to the gang of sodomite men to protect his 2 angelic guests. I wonder if he knows they're angels at this point. Maybe yes, maybe no, I don't know. But it must be a dire situation if he feels like he has to do that. I mean, you definitely wouldn't want to ever put your daughters or anyone that you know under that sort of situation. He must have been in a desperate situation. It's really upsetting. And this is I warned you before last week that this would be an upsetting story. There'd be a lot of crazy stuff going on. But I wonder if there's something that God's doing throughout all of this. I've said it many times before, and I'll say it again, that God takes all things and he works it all for the good of those who love him. And there's that verse in the story of Joseph where Joseph looks at his brothers and he says, what you intended for evil, God intends for good. And so even though there's a lot of evil in this story, you've got forced sex, rape, okay, which is really intense, a really intense thing. You've got Lot having to hand over his daughters to these disgusting men. He's in a desperate situation, okay? There's a lot of crazy stuff going on. And obviously God, as we talked about previously, when the Lord was chatting to Abraham, he was considering destroying the whole city. So you've got a lot of crazy, evil, really intense, scary things going on. But God, I believe God has a plan for Lot and his family, for Abraham. And I believe he has a plan for the city of Sodom as well, to turn all that wickedness, to turn all that evil, and to turn it into something good. I believe that. I do believe that. In verse 9, the men of Sodom, they say, stand back to Lot. They go, get out of our way. You came here as a visitor, and now you're trying to tell us how to live? Don't you know this is Sodom? This is what we do? And they pressed hard against Lot. They pushed him out of the way. And they broke down the door, and then they reached out with their hands and they brought Lot into the house with them, and they locked the door behind them. So they grab Lot, push him out of the way, go inside, then grab him, bring him in with them, and lock the door, lock him in the house. So we'll continue on in verse 12. At this point, when it says the men said to Lot, we're talking about the angels that are guests with Lot at this point, okay? So the men said to Lot, have you anyone else here? Sons-in-law, sons, daughters, or anyone you have in the city, bring them out of the place. For we are about to destroy this place, because the outcry against this people has become great before the Lord. And the Lord has sent us to destroy it. So at this point, the angels are pretty sure that the city of Sodom is as bad as the Lord had said it had been. Okay, and so they've made the decision that we are going to destroy the place. But they ask Lot, do you have any more family members or any friends that are close to you that you can rescue? Because we're about to destroy this place. They're giving him a warning. They're saying, hey, it's time to get out while you still can. Verse 14, so Lot went out and said to his sons-in-law who were to marry his daughters, get up, get out of this place, for the Lord is about to destroy the city. But he seemed to his sons-in-law to be jesting. They didn't believe him. Wow. As morning dawned, the angels urged Lot, saying, up, take your wife and your 2 daughters who are here, lest you be swept away in the punishment of the city. But he lingered. He stayed a little bit longer. He was hesitant. So the men seized him and his wife and his 2 daughters by the hand, the Lord being merciful to him. And they brought him out and set him outside the city. That's an interesting image. I wonder if God wants to draw you and I out of wickedness and out of sinful living, but sometimes we're hesitant. I love that God is gracious enough to sometimes grab us and pull us out of those terrible situations. I know Lot would have wanted to protect his family, but maybe he was nervous, maybe he was afraid, maybe he was hesitant. I mean, definitely when he asked his sons-in-laws to come with him, they didn't believe him. Maybe Lot was doubting himself whether the guests in his house, the angels, were telling the truth and would protect him. But they grabbed his hand, and they grabbed his wife and his daughter's hand, and they led them out of the city, which is awesome. Verse 17, and as they brought him out, one of the angels said, escape for your life. Do not look back or stop anywhere in the valley. Escape to the hills, lest you be swept away. And Lot said to them, oh no, my lords. Behold, your servant has found favor in your sight, and you have shown me great kindness in saving my life. But I cannot escape to the hills, lest the disaster overtake me and I die. Verse 20, behold, this city is near enough to flee to, and it is a little one. Let me escape there. Is it not a little one? And my life will be saved. He said to him, behold, I grant you this favor also, and I will not overthrow the city of which you have spoken. Escape there quickly, for I can do nothing till you arrive there. Therefore, the name of the city was called Zoar. So basically, this is not that integral to the story, but basically Lot is saying, I don't think I can make it to the hills before you destroy the city. I'm worried that when you destroy the city, that maybe in the explosion or the fire, that I'm going to get destroyed and my family are going to get destroyed before we make it to the hills. So can you let us go to the next town over, and then once we're there, can you destroy the city? So yeah, so they make that arrangement. God destroys Sodom in verse 23. The sun had risen on the earth when Lot came to Zoar. Then the Lord rained on Sodom and Gomorrah sulfur and fire from the Lord out of heaven. And he overthrew those cities and all the valley and all the inhabitants of the cities and what grew on the ground. But Lot's wife behind him looked back, and she became a pillar of salt. There was that warning from the angel. Run, get out of here, save yourselves. Don't stop for a second, and don't even dare think about looking back. Lot's wife, she turns back. And the moment she looks back, she was turned into a pillar of salt. I wonder what that could mean. I wonder if you have any thoughts about what that could mean, about turning back when God's asked you to run away from something. That's an interesting image there. I wonder if it symbolizes something or if it's a metaphor for something. Verse 27. And Abraham went early in the morning to the place where he had stood before the Lord, and he looked down towards Sodom and Gomorrah and toward all the land of the valley. And he looked, and behold, the smoke of the land went up like the smoke of a furnace. So it was that when God destroyed the cities of the valley, God remembered Abraham and sent Lot out of the midst of the overthrow when he overthrew the cities in which Lot had lived. You can see here, God is interested in families. He's interested in generations. I've said before that God's plan since the dawn of time is a long game plan. He's in it for the long term, the long haul. He's interested in families, in their connections. Lot is from Abraham's line. He's Abraham's nephew. Okay, so God's interested in that, and promises that go for one person don't just go for them, but it also goes for their family. And God's protection over Abraham and his immediate family also extends to his extended family. Okay, it's about family. So God protected Lot and his daughters because they had faith in him, because they were potentially the only righteous people in that whole city. As we talked about in the previous chapter, when Abraham was trying to bargain with the Lord, he was saying, if there's only 10 righteous people, would you spare the city? And God said, yes, I would. Almost as if he's saying, I am the most gracious person in the universe. How little of me do you think, Abraham? But here he looks after Lot and his family. Here's a question that here's something I thought about in that story. Before we finish up, I wonder if you could compare and contrast the differences between Abraham's response to the visiting angels and Lot's response to the visiting angels. Are there similarities to how they both respond to the angels? Are there differences? What's similar? What's different? Here's another thing I had in my mind when I was reading this story. Lot greeted the visiting angels at the gate of Sodom, and he immediately invited them to stay at his house. I wonder, does that mean that he knew the men of Sodom would try and attack the angels? And he was trying to actually protect them? I wonder, has this happened before to other guests of the city? Perhaps Lot had taken it upon himself to wait at the gate and protect any visiting guests. And I also wonder, do you think Lot fully realized who his visitors were? When he was looking after those men, when he was insisting that they stay at his house so he could protect them, was he doing it just to please some angelic being? Or was he doing it because of his heart of service and love towards people? I wonder if when you help people, um, could you be helping an angel? Right? There's a scripture in the Bible that says, whatever you do for the least of these, you do for me. That's Jesus talking. He's saying, whatever you do to serve human beings here on earth, in a way, you're doing it for me. You're doing it for Jesus. Maybe Lot was lucky that the very people he had to, the very people he felt he had to serve, the very people who he looked after, turned around and actually looked after him and his family. The very people who he had love for and compassion for turned around and actually helped them escape from that terrible situation. A couple other questions I have for you. What did the men of Sodom mean when they said they wanted to know the visitors? And why did Lot offer his daughters up? Was it wrong for him to do that? You get into some ethics there, right? Protecting one group of people by putting another group of people in harm's way. It's a difficult situation. I wonder if we were in that situation, how we would handle that. It's a high pressure, high intensity situation. Okay, let's finish the last section of this chapter. This last section from verse 30 to 38, it kind of goes into some weird territory. So we might deal with that a little bit later, but I'll read it out for you now and we can read that together. Verse 30, Lot and his daughters. Now Lot went up out of Zoar, and he lived in the hills with his 2 daughters, for he was afraid to live in Zoar. So he lived in a cave with his 2 daughters. And the firstborn said to the younger, our father is old, and there is not a man on earth to come into us after the manner of all the earth. So they're saying there's a lot of wicked people on the earth, and we're not going to be able to reproduce with anyone. Verse 32, come, let us make our father drink wine, and we will lie with him, and we may preserve offspring from our father. So they made their father drink wine that night, and the firstborn went in and lay with her father. He did not know when she lay down or when she arose. The next day the firstborn said to the younger, behold, I lay last night with my father. Let us make him drink wine tonight also, and you can go in and lie with him, that we may preserve offspring from our father. So they made their father drink wine that night also, and the younger arose and lay with him, and he did not know when she lay down or when she arose. Thus both daughters of Lot became pregnant by their father. The firstborn bore a son, and his name Moab. He is the father of the Moabites to this day. The younger also bore a son, and his name Ben-Ami. He is the father of the Ammonites to this day. So kind of a sad story, right? Lot is able to save his daughters. He loses his wife. Terrible, tragic situation, but thank God that they were saved, right? And the daughters, they're trying to do the right thing, but it's totally in the wrong way. And this part of the story reminds me of something we read previously in an earlier chapter, where Sarah didn't have faith in God's promise that they'd be able to bear a child, and so she offers her servant Haggai. And so she offers her servant Hagar, she offers her servant Hagar to sleep with her husband, Abram, so that they can have a child that way. And it kind of reminds me of that. Like, the intention is good. They want to preserve their family line, right? Because their mum is gone now, and they're worried for themselves that they're not going to be able to find a husband. And so they preserve their family line by doing something really messed up, by tricking their father, by sleeping with him. And it's a terrible situation. This chapter is really filled with a lot of terrible things. But I still believe, as we read through the next few chapters, that God is doing something. Okay, He doesn't leave us in our wickedness. Okay, He sent the angels to grab the hand of Lot and his family and lead them out of Sodom. Okay, And they, in a way, the moment they were led out of Sodom, they kind of fell back on their wickedness, as you see here. But God's grace is bigger than that. God's grace extends to them even in their wickedness. Okay? And God's grace and his love extends to you and me, even in our mistakes, even in our wickedness. Okay? That's all I have for you right now. Bless. Bye-bye.